Hello and welcome to Speak Easy. The media is under the spotlight. None other than Abhijit Banerjee, the Nobel laureate, said recently in an interview to PTI that the two most critical issues that India faces is media freedom and transparency. Coming from someone who's sitting far away, who obviously follows what's going on in India, I think this is something which we need to take very seriously. So, what is our media doing? Whether it's the television channels or newspapers, there are always honorable exceptions. But are they becoming a mouthpiece for the government? Where is the critical coverage that we expect from the media? To talk about this issue, I have with me today Nidhi Razdan, formerly of NDTV and who now does a show on Decoder. Welcome to Speak Easy, Nidhi.
Nice to be on the other side.
Indeed.
For once.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Indeed. So, Nidhi, you saw what Abhijit Banerjee said. I mean, when I was working with the BBC and, they decided to, reduce the Hindi service, the argument given was that they had to retain Urdu and Burmese because those medias were not fully developed. Today, it made some sense at that time, but today that argument may not be made because a lot of the space for critical thinking or critical appraisal is being filled by foreign media sources. So to begin with, I would like to ask you about Abhijit Banerjee's comments. He says that the most important issues facing India today are media freedom and transparency.
I disagree with him on just one thing. I agree that media freedom and transparency are two big issues, but I think it's more than that. I think we are seeing an institutional decline across the board in our democracy. So it's the media as one pillar, the judiciary, another important pillar, other institutions like Parliament, which no longer are given the kind of importance that they should be. If you look at the data, fewer bills are being debated, fewer bills are being sent for scrutiny to standing committees. Parliament is also sitting far less. So I think all these different democratic institutions have now for the last decade or so really come under a lot of strain. And it's not just, the media alone. And that's a deadly cocktail.
But when he talks of media freedom, I mean, whatever the priority you accord to it, do you think media freedom is under threat in India?
Yeah, obviously it is. I mean, you can see what has happened over the last decade or so. And there is a reason why we rank so badly in the World Press Freedom Index. Now, the government of India says, well, we don't believe these, numbers and our press freedom is great. But we also know the government of India is also lobbying with the same group to say, Hamara press freedom index badha do. We're actually very good on that front. So media freedom gets threatened in different ways, Amit Barwa. Like you've seen how that happens. It's not just, sending reporters to jail, which has also happened, or overtly threatening them, which has also happened. It's also a systematic decimation of news organizations, controlling the narrative in the press, coercion through the use of agencies, which is applied very freely, whether it's newsrooms or corporates or political rivals, right? So there are so many different ways in which you undermine media freedom, and that is happening and has been happening.
So what is your sense? I mean, say today as a news consumer, we saw this spectacle very recently of, a number of television anchors, leading people, I won't take names, repeating the same, tweet or, whatever was dished out to without changing a comma. I mean, basically a government handout, but it doesn't say government handout. It's literally that person's views, but it was all common. So is it the situation now where these anchors or these television personalities, do they have to do this coming from the government?
I think the problem, let's talk about television because that is where I worked for almost 25 years. The problem is that it's a very, very tightly controlled narrative by the government. We know that there are WhatsApp groups that have been set up by different ministries, including from the very top, where literally, like this information is given on WhatsApp and as sources, and then is literally regurgitated by reporters on that beat and anchors. It speaks very poorly of the reporters and anchors who do that because there's no application of mind or to even quote where this has come from. Like you said, they just simply put it out as stenographers. I think in many newsrooms, there's a sense that they don't have a choice because they they are under pressure to do it, and so they do it. I personally believe we all have a choice, and ultimately,
But the reporter or the anchor may be excluded from that WhatsApp group if they show any application of mind, right?
then you have to decide, is access journalism the only way to do journalism? And I think in today's times, a lot of reporters think that the only way to do real journalism is only through access to the corridors of power. But we know that that's not the case. That doesn't have some of the best journalism we see in the country even today is from reporters who are not in Delhi, who are not in the corridors of the Home Ministry or Finance Ministry or any ministry, but are just reporting what's happening on the ground. Like, look at COVID, or, the plight of migrants who had to walk on foot. That was not access journalism. That was good journalism, but it didn't require a PIB card to do it.
So what you're saying is that, one is the reporters, and also the fact that the Modi government has clear access to owners. I mean, they prefer to deal with owners, not even with editors often. I mean, they have direct pipelines, and, the pressure comes from the owners on their editors and the reporters.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, look, ownership structures in the media, that is ultimately at the heart of this entire debate. And that's not just in India. Look at what has happened to the Washington Post. I mean, literally, as we speak, just this week, we've seen these mass layoffs. So billionaires taking over media institutions.
Right. We know that. We know about that.
We know that. I know that.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that it's not that those ownership structures were perfect even when I was a part of NDTV.
Of course.
Let's be honest.
Yeah,
okay?
of course. Yeah.
These were very imperfect structures. There's this corporate ownership. And therefore, ultimately, the only way truly independent media will thrive is if people subscribe to watch or to read news. And that is still a big challenge in India. News Laundry is trying to do it, and they keep trying to push that model, but it's not easy. People don't want to, if they get an article on WhatsApp which is behind 100 rupee paywall and they know it's a good piece, it might be a good investigative piece. Mujhe 100 rupees nahi dene isko kholne ke liye, why should I? Somebody send me a PDF of screenshots. You will do anything but pay to read that article. So that is at the heart of the problem. So ultimately, that's the debate we have to address: media ownership structures. And like I said, it's a debate the whole world is grappling.
Of course. But I mean, I just don't want to confine it just to television. I mean, newspapers too. So what I'm wanting to ask you is that, I mean, is it that, we've seen very bold reporters, and you also pointed out that so many people have suffered, for their reporting. And I want to point out especially to Anurag Dwari of NDTV Hindi, who recently was very politely but very firmly told off a senior BJP minister, Kailash Vijayvargiya, that this is not the way to talk to him. And, he did, and it was done in a very polite and decent fashion. So is it not the case that there are many reporters in media, whether it's in television or in print, who are still trying to do their job?
I think they are. And that's why I don't think the situation is totally bleak. I think broadcast media, on the whole, I'm also teaching journalism students, and I honestly don't recommend that they watch television news because it's not news any longer. With some honorable exceptions, if there is a report that stands out,
or you watch on YouTube,
or you watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, etc. But I think a lot of good journalists then went into that independent YouTube space, which is why the government really wants to clamp down on that space and control it as well. Again, they are doing good work, but it's also, like I said, the unsung reporters who are working as stringers, or working somewhere, sort of the invisible India, in far-flung parts of UP or MP or wherever. And they will bring out things like corruption on the ground, sand mafias, mining mafias, midday meal scheme scams, and they often pay a very heavy price for that. For reporting all these things. So they are doing some really, really good journalism. Now, the thing is that our bar is so low that when a reporter or an anchor even asks a question which is part of that, which is normal, which would have been normal once upon a time, we say, "Wow, you're so brave." It's not bravery. You're doing your job.
And what would you say? I mean, you reported and you were an anchor when the Congress was in power, and you were also reporting in the initial phases of the Modi government as well. For NDTV, you were anchoring and so on. So, do you find a difference in approach between, say, the UPA and the Modi government on as far as media is concerned, as far as access is concerned, as far as being able to question people and still being able to talk to them afterwards?
So the thing is that even under the UPA government, when I started reporting, Mr. Vajpayee was the prime minister. I was reporting on his government. And if you compare actually that BJP NDA government to this one,
There's not much comparison.
there is,
Yeah.
it's a,
There's not much of a comparison.
but
Yeah.
it was interesting because again, everybody had access to the top leaders. You would meet people, you would get viewpoints, interviews. There was room for disagreement. And of course, all governments try to control the narrative.
Of course.
Everyone
That's
does
their
that.
job also.
That is
Yeah,
their job.
yeah.
It's also the job of the media to push back. Even under the UPA, let's face it, there was pressure on media houses. You would get messages from top ministers. Oh, why is this sticker running? This news is.
But would you say that was more individual? I mean, would it be like, say, ex-minister wanting to, say that, don't cover my ministry or this issue in this way?
No, I think it was both. There was definitely, there would be a pushback, and the Radia tapes, for example, were, frankly, not a moment of glory for the way the media at that time
Was functioning.
was
Yeah.
functioning.
Yeah.
Okay, so that shows that we.
Yeah, there's no
were not
golden phase. I mean,
There's no golden phase,
no.
But I think what's different between then and now, the fact is that, look, there were a series of scams and alleged scams under the UPA, a crisis that Dr. Manmohan Singh faced as Prime Minister. But we were free to report on that without worrying that the ED will come knocking at our door the next day. Okay, so the same NDTV, which was branded as anti-BJP later, was the same NDTV that night after night would make the 2G scam a headline, or the Commonwealth Games scam, or the coal scam, or the Nirbhaya gang rape, and covered all those stories relentlessly.
But you still had access to people if you wanted them. Yeah.
But to be honest, I also saw during the last year or so of Dr. Manmohan Singh's prime ministership that people within his government also started closing off.
Mhm.
Like, I used to cover the foreign ministry. And I remember seeing a change where at one time we could walk in with our PIB cards into the Ministry of External Affairs and literally talk to any secretary, Government of India official, just have a chat with them. They started closing off that access.
Yeah. Actually, you started with Jaswant Singh. He is the one when as minister.
But under
Yeah.
the UPA,
It became tougher.
it became tougher. There was also, because I've covered these various prime ministers, if you remember, even when a foreign dignitary was visiting, you could ask a domestic political question at the joint press conference. Firstly, there used to be press conferences.
Yes.
It was a big,
I mean, that needs to be said.
and
Yeah.
you could ask the prime minister a domestic political
Of
question
course,
as
yeah.
well. But again, that change started coming under the UPA when it became more tightly controlled,
Yeah.
where we were told you can't ask domestic questions. We were also supposed to submit our questions in advance.
Mm.
As a result of which some very atrocious
Right.
questions got asked to President Obama, I remember, during his first visit. Under the BJP, what is different is that there is now a fear. Okay, there is a fear that if I report on XYZ issue that is perceived to be anti-government, then me or my news organization will face consequences for that, in terms of maybe having the agencies at our doorstep or whatever. And with the proliferation of social media, it's very quick to label people as anti-national or anti-India or whatever. So I think that is what has really changed in the
So
last.
do you worry? I mean, you have a presence on social media. Do you worry that if you express your views, you face a lot of backlash and trolls and all, or do you take it in your stride?
I think anyone who says they take trolling in their stride is lying, because it's very hurtful and it's not nice. It's nasty. But I think as a result of this organized trolling, which I have faced from all sides, which I think is a compliment, but I think you do self-censor a little. I think you do think twice, especially as a woman journalist, about whether you want to put out your views on something or not. And I think that's unfortunate, because there was a time that you could feel that you could say anything, and I don't like social media, but you do have to use it to I mean, you'll have to use it
Yeah.
today. Okay, this is what I did on Frontline today.
Sure, of course.
I do it for Decoder.
Yeah.
But sometimes you want to put out a view there. But I think we all consciously or subconsciously end up doing a lot of self-censorship and thinking twice about whether it's worth putting this out there and the headache that follows.
Right. And tell me, you worked in, NDTV for a long time, and, we all know what happened with NDTV and so on and so forth. I mean, if I were to ask you that, would you like to work in any news channel today? Would you consider an opportunity if it came your way, or would you feel that it's too constrictive?
An opportunity, to be honest, was coming my way even after I quit, but no. I've worked with the best in the industry, Pranoy and Radhika Roy. I mean, they are our mentors. And to be honest, every sort of big journalist that you see on television today, and even those who've then veered out into print, etc., come from Pranoy Roy's school of broadcasting. I can't imagine working for anyone else. And honestly, every news channel is a mirror image
of the
other. They're all pretty much government mouthpieces. I think there are one or two exceptions of anchors who are still...
But they are real exceptions.
But they are. Because the fact is that you know who I'm talking about, that there are so few and far in between. So I would find it just very difficult, to work in an atmosphere where I am told that the spin on everything has to be positive, or where editorial policy is decided for me. So no, I wouldn't.
Right. So, and what is your sense of YouTube journalism? Since you teach journalism as well, I mean, we have the phenomena of Ravish Kumar and Ajit Anjum and Abhisar Sharma and a host of others in Hindi especially. I don't know whether in English it's as much, but what is your sense? I mean, is this the future of independent journalism, or do you think that a day will come where there will be, I mean, I'm not to say that many legacy organizations are not doing their job. Some of them are, or may I say they do it occasionally, or they do it sometimes, they do it on a Monday, may not do it on a Tuesday as
That's
well.
a
I
good
mean,
way to put it.
that's probably, the way to look at it. But what is your sense? I mean, is this the future of independent journalism in India? Individuals taking to YouTube?
I think it's the present. It's already happening. So these are all people that you've named who have had to pay a price in legacy media organizations for not towing the line, and who then decided to go out on their own and are doing really, really well. I mean, even, I find my dad, like, in his 80s, is watching more news on YouTube and doesn't turn on the television anymore. And like him, his friends and cousins, etc., are doing the same thing. So these people have a phenomenal following. It is not easy to do YouTube, to do journalism on YouTube.
It's pretty relentless.
It's quite relentless. It's not easy, but these guys are at it. And I think, like I said right at the beginning, that's why the government wants to have rules in place to control online content as well. There's a reason for that. So I think a lot of that has to do with these journalists.
Right. And so, I mean, but institutionally, do you feel that, with the kind of technology evolving, and you see so many other social media platforms coming up, you think that, at any point, it will become easier to build, small institutions? Of course, we have websites, we have Independent Web, we have The Wire, we have Scroll, we have a number of independent websites. But do you see any other platforms emerging at all?
I don't think it's easy. I think it's easy to romanticize how, these sort of independent digital platforms, we know the financial struggles that they face.
But they're still going on.
They're going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, it isn't easy, but I think that there is a space for it, which is quite clear. So I don't think mainstream television is going anywhere. I think people still want to watch that, like, especially when something big happens, like elections, but even that's changing, because again, online platforms,
you can watch the results on the election commission or on election commission website.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want,
I mean, but if you want analysis, so I remember during COVID, people again came back to watching television news, because it was a very unusual time. People wanted information. So it's still a very important medium, but I think there is space. And it's already happening for all these other platforms. People now are not just consuming news from one news channel, 9 p.m. news, one newspaper. there is a lot to choose from. But the question is, how many people realize the biases, the slants, even in newspapers, you know?
They are also part of the same WhatsApp groups that you talked about. I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's print or television.
Yeah. So in
Yeah.
television, I think it's just more in your face. The nature of the medium is also such. In newspapers, it's often more subtle. It depends on how the editorial is written, who's writing the editorial, where the headlines are placed on page one. You know how it is. And often, I don't know how many people realize. I mean, you can pretty much tell. I mean, I know if I'm picking up X newspaper, what its lead will be as opposed to Y newspaper because of its politics.
No. And the other thing is that, whether the accounts, I mean, say, 20 years ago, if you picked up an array of newspapers, you would get different points of view from, say, the same meeting.
Yeah.
But today, it's pretty much uniform. You are getting one view mostly. I mean, they're not to say they're
See,
exceptional.
that way I like the British press because they make their allegiances known.
At
At
which
least
is
they
one
say-
way of, yeah.
Yeah. Which,
Which
they support the Tories or the,
Yeah.
or Labour or whatever. So
Yeah.
you know where their political alliances, where their
Right.
political preferences lie.
So you also mentioned that you teach journalism students. So what do you tell them as a career option? I mean, do you suggest? I mean, with the media that we have, I mean, what options do they have as journalists to make careers?
One thing that saddens me a little is that I don't see that kind of enthusiasm for a hardcore reporting career today amongst students that maybe was there even 10, 20 years ago. So I don't think journalism, the way we have done it, is necessarily the first choice for this generation. Those who are interested, I'm still an idealist because I still believe that if you have good people in the profession who come into the profession, there is still hope for us. And I clutch onto the positives that, when you see the Ravishas and Abhisars and other, independent journalists out there, that, all is not bleak. So I try to encourage them. I tell them about the adventures I have had as a reporter and what that has meant to me, being able to travel around the world, around the country, to be able to interview, meet people, cover stories that you could never imagine in your life. But I do see a decline generally in interest as journalism as a profession. And I think that's happening not just in India. I think that's happening in the West also, where unfortunately I think journalists are not, I think the media is generally facing a trust crisis, with consumers about what to trust. We're seeing that debate in America also with liberal media versus...
No, during Operation Sindoor, I mean, if you saw Indian TV channels, Lahore, Karachi, everything had been
important.
captured. So our forces didn't have to do anything because the media had done it all.
By doing stupid things like that, television media not only discredits itself, it also discredits what the government is trying to do when it is trying to tell the world what Pakistan did to India and the seriousness of, why it had to do Operation Sindoor. So when you make fantastical claims and you make up stuff or you put out unverified things, then those countries turn around and, they mock you. They don't take this
And with reason. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things is, I think, whether it's data, whether it's our newspapers or television media, the credibility that they carried was also a big soft power for India. And today that soft power, at least I think, is quite decimated.
It is. So, I mean, if the world doesn't buy your narrative today, it's also because you've made a fool of yourself in the way you've covered a particular story. And, especially I think on national security matters, there is a kind of a fear to ask any question. You can't question the army. You can't question the armed forces. It's a democracy. You should be able to question anybody.
Yeah.
Even the Supreme Court of India.
Once they give their judgments, their judgments are fair game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But
you
for saying this, who knows?
who knows? Yeah.
Some honorable
Yeah. Who-
judge somewhere may think that we are in contempt.
Yeah. So, and the last thing I want to touch on is, if there's always, the vacuum is always filled up. So, YouTubers, independent websites, individuals on social media, they're functioning, they're filling a certain role. How do you see, the foreign media? I mean, a lot of, for instance, on the economy, I see Reuters, doing a lot of stories which perhaps domestic media outlets should be doing. So what is your sense? What is the role of this foreign media section? I mean, they've also been harassed by this government. A lot of people didn't have their visas renewed and had to go back and so on.
Raided also. Yeah.
So, yeah. So what is your sense? I mean, what role will they play in this kind of media environment in India?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of critical and I think more sort of hardcore reporting on issues like affecting the Indian economy, etc., from outlets like Reuters and Bloomberg, etc. But I also do think that the Western media is not without its own share of bias. I mean, they also look at India through a certain prism and a certain sort of preset point of view. I think India is a very complicated, complex country to cover. It's not a monolith. We know that. So I don't think that often comes out in their reporting. It's very sort of they're very binary in the way they approach things. But yeah, some of them are still doing journalism that domestic news outlets should be doing. And more than foreign media, I think it's just the fact checkers. I mean, why should you have independent fact checkers? Isn't that what journalists in general should be doing, checking facts? The fact that you have an Alt News or a Boom Live or other fact checkers out there who have to...
Someone like Zubair is doing a first-class job. Yeah.
And they're doing it because you don't have that kind of basic fact checking in mainstream legacy news organizations. So they're filling that gap. Sections of the foreign media are filling that gap. Not perfectly, like I said, but they are. So I think legacy media right now thinks that it's untouchable, because of the way the political dispensation is, that this is how things will be, and they can do things without being questioned.
Well, that's a pretty scary thought, that why we need fact checkers. As Nidhi rightly puts it, the fact checkers should be very much part and parcel embedded in journalism, and every reporter should, be his or her own fact checker. Yeah. So, well, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you, Nidhi, for talking to Speakeasy and Frontline. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me.